I knew it was strange the first time it happened. My coffee was already paid for, and I hadn't even taken my wallet out. I froze, staring at the cup, unsure whether to laugh or cry. At first, I thought maybe the barista had made a mistake. But then it happened again. And again. It became a pattern I couldn't ignore. Someone was paying for me, always. Every single time I walked into that cafe, the barista would slide my cup across the counter with a little nod, a half smile, and a faint glimmer of something unspoken. At first, I told myself it was just coincidence. Maybe the barista had started a new pay-it-forward thing, or maybe someone had left extra change in the tip jar and it accidentally got applied to my order. But when it happened the third time in a row, I started noticing the rhythm. It wasn't just a random act anymore. It was deliberate. Someone was choosing to do this for me, every morning, like clockwork. And every time, I felt this flicker of warmth, like a tiny pulse of light threading through the gray blur of my mornings. That little spark made the early alarms bearable. It made the city feel softer. It made me curious. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The first time it happened, I hadn't even realized until I reached for my wallet. I paused, mid-motion, staring at the cup in confusion. Wait, my coffee? I muttered to myself, voice barely audible over the hiss of the espresso machine. Someone paid for this? The barista had glanced up at me, that little professional smile in place, and said, "Looks like you've got a secret admirer." I laughed nervously, shoving my wallet back into my bag as if it had suddenly become an embarrassing accessory. I told myself it didn't matter. It was probably just a mistake. But then it happened again. And again. Each time, my pulse would quicken before I even saw the barista's face. A flash of anticipation ran through me, this strange, helpless excitement that I couldn't explain. By the fourth time, my heart was already pounding before I even approached the counter. And I started scanning the cafe, unconsciously searching for someone, anyone, who might be doing this. I think someone keeps paying for me, I murmured one rainy morning, my voice barely above the hiss of the espresso machine. My hands were trembling slightly, the tips brushing against the wet countertop as if I could anchor myself somehow. The city outside was gray and dripping, umbrellas bobbing past the fogged-up windows. The aroma of coffee was warm and bitter, curling into my senses, filling the corners of the small cafe. The barista glanced at me, and this time, there was a little smirk tugging at her lips, a smirk that made my stomach twist in a way I didn't like, and didn't understand. "He's been doing it on purpose," she said, sliding my cup closer. Her eyes flicked to something behind me for a second, and then she looked back, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I froze. My voice caught in my throat. "On purpose?" I whispered, almost disbelieving, and almost scared. She shrugged, going back to wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen far too many coffee spills. "Apparently," she said lightly, but there was an undertone I couldn't quite place, a hint of amusement, maybe even a little mischief. My stomach twisted. My coffee, my little slice of peace in the middle of chaotic mornings, wasn't an accident. Someone had noticed me. And for reasons I didn't yet understand, it made my heart feel exposed. Like I was being looked at in a way that made my pulse speed and my breath catch, and left me with the vague, terrifying sensation that I was marked. I tried to brush it off, walking toward the little corner table I always claimed, my bag slung over one shoulder. I forced myself to focus on my laptop screen, forcing my fingers to click and type as if I were working. But I couldn't stop thinking about him, whoever he was. My imagination filled in every empty seat, every shadow in the cafe, every reflection in the window with a figure I couldn't see, but somehow felt. Who would do that? Why me? I asked myself this over and over, and each time the question twisted tighter in my chest. And why, for some inexplicable, irrational reason, did the thought of him paying for my coffee make my chest tighten in ways I couldn't name? My pulse was too fast, my hands too warm. My stomach felt like it was full of electric butterflies, fluttering, restless, uncontrollable. I kept glancing at the door. Part of me wanted to catch a glimpse of him, see if I could even recognize him. But the other part of me, the part that had spent years avoiding attention, that had perfected invisibility, that had built walls out of awkwardness and shyness, wanted to look away. Didn't want to hope. Didn't want to risk disappointment. Didn't want to be caught staring. And yet, I did. Every time. I started timing my visits carefully. Arriving a few minutes earlier, lingering longer, pretending to read emails while secretly watching the door. Some days, he would walk past, barely noticeable, a shadow among the morning crowd, and my stomach would lurch as if he had stepped directly into my chest. Other days, he wouldn't appear at all, and I would feel the tight squeeze of frustration and longing, like I had been abandoned by some unspoken, electric connection I didn't even know I had. I noticed little patterns. The cup would always be waiting before I reached the counter. The exact same blend. The foam on top always perfectly swirled. And sometimes, when I picked it up, there would be a little slip of paper tucked underneath, nothing written, just folded neatly, almost like a promise that someone had been there, and would be there again. One rainy afternoon, as I stared absently out the window at the city blurred by wet neon lights, the barista leaned in closer than usual. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You know, he watches sometimes. Not in a creepy way, but you catch his eye more than you realize. My throat went dry. Watches? I stammered, my fingers curling around the edge of the table. She shrugged, as if the weight of the secret wasn't hers to bear. You notice things you're not supposed to notice sometimes. Little looks, gestures. He's intentional. Careful. But he's paying attention. Paying attention. The words echoed inside me like a drumbeat. I didn't want to admit it, but my chest felt like it might burst. Why was I thinking about someone I didn't even know? And yet, I couldn't stop. The warmth that had started as a flicker had grown into something heavier, almost unbearable. And then, just when I thought I had gathered my courage to leave, to escape the gnawing obsession forming inside me, the bell over the door jingled. A figure stepped in, tall, quiet, and completely ordinary, except for the way my pulse stuttered and my fingers itched to reach out. I looked up, and for a fraction of a second, he met my eyes. Something unspoken passed between us, a spark, a fleeting recognition, a jolt that felt like it had been waiting for years to strike. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything. He just nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, and ordered his coffee. I pretended to return to my laptop, but I couldn't. I didn't even try. My thoughts had spun out of control. Who was he? Why was he doing this? And why did I feel like I was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something I didn't yet understand but couldn't walk away from even if I wanted to? I tried to calm myself. Took a deep breath. Sipped my coffee slowly. But my hands were shaking. And when I glanced up again, he had disappeared. Vanished into the crowd outside. My heart thudded painfully, and I realized this wasn't just curiosity anymore. It wasn't just a fluke. It was something else entirely. I spent the rest of the day replaying the moment in my head, over and over. Every detail. The way his shoulders moved. The tilt of his head. The sound of his voice when he ordered. Every movement was etched into my mind, and yet, I didn't even know his name. And that's when I started imagining scenarios, absurd, improbable, but irresistible. What if he followed me home? What if he knew more about me than I realized? What if this coffee thing, was his way of reaching out, his way of trying to connect, and I had no idea how much he wanted it to work? By the next morning, I was obsessed. I couldn't just go in for a coffee. I had to see him. Had to catch a glimpse. Had to know if he was real or just a figment of a city waking up too early. And every time I passed the door, every time I saw a shadow in the window, my heart leapt, and I felt something dangerous and thrilling, a risk I wanted, even though I didn't understand why. When I murmured again to the barista, weeks later, I think, someone keeps paying for me, my voice was shaky, desperate, fragile, as if admitting it out loud might summon him, or break me completely. And when she smirked, he's been doing it on purpose, I felt something inside me twist, tighten, shiver. On purpose. The words repeated in my head all day, like a heartbeat I couldn't control. On purpose. Someone was noticing me. Someone was watching. Someone was choosing me. And even as I tried to focus on work, on the emails and reports in front of me, my thoughts kept drifting back to the cafe, back to the pattern, back to him. I didn't know his name, didn't know anything about him, but I knew. I needed to find out. I needed to see him again. Then, one evening, I saw him. It wasn't in the cafe where I had come to expect his shadow, or the quiet anticipation of someone sliding a paid cup across the counter. He wasn't waiting at the corner, wasn't leaning casually against the lamppost, wasn't smiling like he knew some secret I wasn't meant to know. No, he was moving, fleeting, a silhouette against the glow of traffic lights, and our eyes met in that split second of motion that felt suspended in time. There was intensity there, quiet, sharp, dangerous even. A fire that didn't roar but simmered, a weight that pressed against my chest in the strangest way, making it hard to breathe, making it impossible to look away. My heart thumped, hard enough I was sure someone in a nearby car could hear it. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just coincidence. My rational mind sputtered, clawing at explanations. He could have been a stranger, a passerby, a friend of someone I didn't know, but my chest didn't listen. My stomach had already twisted into tight, anxious knots, and my fingers tingled as though I could reach across the distance between us, though we were separated by metal, glass, and an entire street. Yet the next night, as I left the cafe, the rain pattering against my umbrella, my bag clutched too tightly against my side, he was there. Waiting. Not leaning casually this time, but standing with a presence that seemed deliberate, controlled. A shadow that commanded attention, though his face was calm. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to steady myself, trying to ignore the racing of my pulse. Need a ride? His voice was low, kind, deliberate. It didn't command, but it held a power all the same, a tone that made my knees weak, that sent shivers crawling down my spine without permission. I blinked, unsure if I was dreaming. My lips parted, and I managed a voice that sounded far too high, far too nervous. Sure. The first ride was ordinary, mundane even, except it wasn't. Because ordinary had become impossible in his presence. The hum of the engine beneath us, the steady rhythm of the wipers against the windshield, the dull glow of passing streetlights, it all transformed into a backdrop for something I couldn't name. I kept glancing at him, unable to stop, unable to pretend that nothing had shifted in the air between us. There was something in the way he looked at me in the rearview mirror. Curiosity, yes. Concern, maybe. And something softer, deeper, like he was seeing right through the careful walls I'd built around myself for so long. The tension in his shoulders was subtle, almost invisible, but my eyes caught it, and my stomach did somersaults I couldn't explain. I noticed everything, every little detail. The curve of his jaw catching the reflection of the passing lights. The faint crease in his brow when he concentrated on the road. The slight tilt of his head when he glanced at me from the corner of his eye. I couldn't tell if I was imagining the electricity that seemed to pulse from him, or if it was real, tangible, a current I could almost reach out and touch. I don't usually take rides with strangers, I said, my voice trembling even as I tried to keep it steady. Every word felt like an exposure, like I was confessing something dangerous to a stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. He shrugged, eyes still on the road, the calm assertion of his presence unsettling in a way that made my chest flutter. Neither do I. But sometimes, he said, and the pause made my pulse quicken, you find reasons to break your own rules. That tiny confession, so simple, so casual, yet so charged, sent a jolt through me. A jolt I wasn't prepared for. My evenings, once predictable and lonely, suddenly felt like dangerous adventures, tinged with an intensity one had spent years avoiding. My mind raced, imagining possibilities, the what-ifs I didn't dare speak aloud. And yet, every fiber of me wanted to follow the thread of this connection, this invisible magnet that pulled me toward him in ways that were terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I tried to focus on the road ahead, on the familiar streets glinting wet under the rain, on the steady hum of the engine. But my eyes kept darting toward him, catching glimpses of the way his hands gripped the wheel, the way his jaw clenched ever so slightly when he navigated through puddles. Every movement, every gesture felt loaded, imbued with meaning I wasn't sure I was ready to decode. And then came the silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that stretches taut between two people who feel a charge too big to ignore. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag. My breathing shallowed. Every instinct in me screamed that something was about to shift, that one glance, one word, one accidental brush of hands could tip the world upside down. I caught him looking at me again, just for a fraction of a second, and it was enough. Enough to make my stomach twist, enough to make my heart stutter, enough to make me realize, no, feel, in my bones, that the world as I knew it was no longer the same. There was something here, dangerous and real, and it demanded attention whether I wanted it to or not. "Do you always do this?" I asked, my voice trembling with curiosity and something else I didn't want to name. "Drive around, wait, watch." He didn't answer immediately. His focus stayed on the road. But the way his lips pressed into a thin line, the faint tightening of his jaw, the subtle shift in his posture, it was an answer in itself. He didn't need words to communicate what he was feeling. And that scared me more than anything else, the clarity of the unspoken, the certainty that there were depths here I wasn't ready to plumb. I didn't mean to stare," I said, hating how flustered I sounded, how exposed my vulnerability felt. "It's just strange. Unexpected." His eyes flicked to me then, just for a heartbeat, and I felt it, something raw, something unpolished, something entirely impossible to ignore. The intensity in his gaze made me swallow hard. My fingers curled into fists in my lap. "Unexpected," he murmured softly, almost to himself, and then turned back to the road. The car was quiet again, but now the silence was heavier, thicker. The air between us seemed charged, vibrating with a tension I didn't understand, but that made my pulse race and my thoughts spiral. I found myself imagining what it would feel like to reach over, to touch him, to close the distance that was somehow already collapsing between us. I wanted to turn my head, to look at him fully, to study every line of his face, every shadow that danced across his features in the dim glow of the dashboard. But fear held me back. Not the fear of rejection, or of embarrassment, but a deeper, more primal fear. The fear of losing control over something I didn't yet understand. The rain outside intensified, hammering against the windshield in rhythmic, almost hypnotic pulses. The wipers kept time with my heartbeat, and I realized, horrifyingly and wonderfully, that I was addicted to this feeling. To him. To the precarious thrill of being near someone who had already become indispensable without even speaking my name. I tried to focus on something mundane, my bag, the flickering streetlights, the way the wet asphalt gleamed under the lamplight. But it was impossible. My mind kept drifting, creating scenarios, imagining confessions I wasn't ready to say, imagining touches that might happen, or might never happen, and every imagined possibility sent a thrill through me, dangerous and uncontrollable. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw a reflection, his profile in the rearview mirror. The faint flicker of emotion across his face made my chest tighten further, a grip so strong I couldn't loosen it even if I wanted to. And just like that, every rational thought I had tried to hold on to shattered, leaving me raw, exposed, trembling with anticipation. I didn't even notice we had stopped at a red light. The world outside blurred, traffic lights stretching into elongated lines, pedestrians ghosting past the wet pavement. And then, suddenly, his hand brushed mine, not deliberately, not boldly, but just enough to make my heart leap into my throat. I jerked my hand away, but not completely. Not yet. Not before I felt the warmth linger, a quiet, insistent pull that made every thought in my head dissolve into the singular, overwhelming awareness that he was here, and he mattered, and he wasn't going anywhere. He glanced at me, and I thought I might fall apart. There was something unspoken in his gaze, something heavy, layered, dangerous, and yet tender in a way that made my chest ache. I wanted to ask 100 questions. I wanted to demand explanations. I wanted to tell him everything I'd been feeling since the first time someone had paid for my coffee. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I understood why my heart was already halfway surrendered, why my thoughts circled him like moths to a flame, why even the silence between us felt louder than any confession could ever be. The light turned green, and the car rolled forward. The tension didn't dissipate, it followed us, clung to the edges of the leather seats, threaded itself through the vibrations of the engine. I felt it in my fingers, my chest, my stomach, a constant, insistent pull I didn't want to resist. I started, voice trembling. I've been waiting for something like this. He didn't answer immediately. He just let the silence stretch, letting the words settle between us, and I realized with a jolt that I had no idea what he thought, what he felt, whether he had felt the same pull, the same dangerous, insatiable tension building night after night, ride after ride. I wanted to look at him, to search his eyes, but I was terrified. Terrified that the moment I did, everything could change, or disappear entirely. The rain continued to fall, blurring the lights, distorting the streets, making the world feel like it existed solely in this fragile, electric bubble that we shared. And in that bubble, nothing else mattered. Not the city. Not the streets. Not the ordinary, mundane world that waited beyond the windshield. There was only him, only me, only the current that surged between us, quiet, deliberate, unyielding. Every moment, every glance, every breath he took seemed to echo inside me, resonating in ways I couldn't name. And I knew, with a clarity that was terrifying and exhilarating, that my life would never be the same. Not after this. Not after him. At first, it was little things. Tiny, almost imperceptible gestures that felt like sparks in the otherwise gray routine of my days. A smile that lingered too long, just a second longer than necessary, leaving me caught in its warmth long after it had vanished. A hand brushing mine as he handed me a cup, so subtle that I could tell anyone else might miss it, but I never did. Every time our fingers touched, even briefly, I felt this jolt, electric and startling, as if someone had flipped a switch inside me. Shared laughter followed, small and quiet, over things that seemed ridiculous at the time, jokes about the café, a word mispronounced, a spilled sugar packet, but the intimacy lingered. It was as if he and I had created a small world that existed solely in glances and gestures, where nobody else could intrude. Each laugh, each shared glance, made the mundane world outside blur, turning the rain streaking the windshield into a soft, forgiving haze that made every ordinary street feel cinematic, charged, alive. And then came the stolen glances. The moments where our eyes met and lingered, unbroken, far longer than social rules allowed. Eyes that seemed to communicate everything we weren't saying, everything our words couldn't carry. Each time, my heartbeat stuttered, skipping a beat before hammering, wild, uncontrollable. My skin tingled in places I couldn't name, a warmth spreading across my chest and down my arms. I feel like I've known you forever, I whispered one night, the rain drumming against the windshield and turning the city outside into a watercolor painting, soft and unrecognizable. My fingers gripped the edge of my bag in my lap, knuckles white, because admitting it aloud felt like stepping off a cliff without a parachute. He didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched between us, long and electric, and my chest tightened so painfully that I could hardly breathe. I wanted to apologize for saying it aloud, for breaking the quiet cocoon that had settled around us. But then, finally, he spoke. Or maybe we were supposed to find each other. His words fell softly into the night, barely more than a breath, but they were enough to make the world tilt, to make the air heavy and impossible to ignore. My stomach twisted in ways I hadn't anticipated, every nerve ending humming, alive, alert. My pulse thundered so loudly I could almost hear it over the rain, and I hated myself for the way my body betrayed me, betraying my rational mind. I hated how much I wanted him. Hated it. Every shared glance, every fleeting touch, every soft word was a spark, and I felt like I was walking on fire, burning in ways I didn't have a right to feel. But I couldn't stop. And as the nights passed, our rides became more than just rides. They became confessions. Tiny, tentative, and dangerous confessions. Words that slipped out without warning. "I like this," I'd murmur, meaning the ride, the city lights, the quiet intimacy, the way he made me feel like I wasn't invisible. And he'd answer with something equally fleeting, like a glance or a half-smile that seemed to carry worlds of meaning. Sometimes, it was a question, just a whisper of curiosity: "Do you always notice these things, or you have a way of seeing too much?" And every time, I felt a thrill that was both terrifying and intoxicating. And yet, the more I got to know him, the more complicated he became. There were shadows in his eyes, faint lines of fatigue and unspoken worry that made him almost unreachable. I learned quickly that his kindness wasn't just a habit, it was a shield. A barrier that kept the world at bay, a careful construction to protect himself from something I couldn't yet understand. And as much as I wanted to reach through those shadows, to brush away the walls he had built so deliberately, I wasn't sure I should. I tried to rationalize it, over and over. "Don't get attached," I told myself in whispers as the engine hummed beneath us. "It's too soon. You don't even know him. He's complicated. This is dangerous." But my body refused to listen. Every glance, every touch, every shared silence tore through my logic, leaving me raw, exposed, and desperate. One night, I finally asked the question I had been avoiding, the one that lingered in the pit of my stomach, gnawing at me relentlessly. "Why do you do this? Pay for my coffee? Give me rides?" His hands tightened on the wheel ever so slightly, and I felt it, not through sight, not through words, but through the subtle contraction, the tension in his fingers, that small but unmistakable shift. I saw it before I heard it, felt it before it was spoken. "Because I see you. Really see you. And I don't know how to stop." The words hit me harder than anything I could have imagined. A lump rose in my throat, my chest constricting, and for a second I wanted to cry, not from sadness, not from joy, but from the overwhelming weight of understanding that someone, somehow, had been looking for me, watching me, caring enough to break the patterns of normalcy that made life safe but hollow. I wanted to reach for him. Wanted to close the distance that existed between us, to tell him I felt the same, that every heartbeat, every anxious glance, every stolen smile was mine too. But fear held me back. Fear of being too bold. Fear of ruining everything. Fear that I was too late, that by opening my heart fully I might shatter the fragile connection we had built. I imagined the worst constantly, each scenario more torturous than the last. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if my confession ruined the delicate, perfect rhythm that existed between us? What if, by daring to reach, I destroyed the small, intimate world we had created on rainy nights and glowing street lights? Even as I hesitated, even as my rational mind screamed for caution, I noticed the small things, the way his eyes lingered on mine in the rearview mirror, the subtle lift of his lips at moments when he thought I wasn't looking, the quiet breath he exhaled that seemed almost synchronized with my own. It was as if the car, the road, the rain, and the night itself conspired to create a cocoon around us, a space where time slowed, where reality could bend, where danger and desire twisted together in ways I had never felt before. My hands curled in my lap, gripping the edges of my bag, and I couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to just reach over. To close the space between us. To touch him and feel the warmth, the electricity, the impossible closeness that had been building quietly, dangerously, over the past weeks. My breath caught in my throat at the thought, and I hated myself for wanting it so badly, for craving it with a ferocity I had never known. The rain streaked down the windshield in silver threads, blurring the city into smudges of light and shadow, making the ordinary streets feel like a dream, a fragile stage set for something impossible to define. Every flash of a passing car's headlights caught in his eyes, making them gleam, making them feel alive, as if they were windows into a world I wasn't supposed to enter, but desperately wanted to. I started, voice trembling. My fingers fidgeted with the zipper of my bag. I think. I like being here. With you. I mean, this. All of it. He didn't answer immediately. He just let the silence stretch, allowing my words to linger between us like a living thing. My chest felt tight, constricted, but in the most delicious, terrifying way. And then, when he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate, gentle, I know. The simplicity of it nearly shattered me. I know. 2 words, and yet they carried a lifetime of weight, of intention, of something unspoken that felt far bigger than either of us. I couldn't look at him directly. I was too aware, too raw, too alive to meet his gaze without trembling. My thoughts tumbled in wild spirals. What did it mean? Was this real? Could I trust it? Could I trust him? Every rational part of me screamed caution, screamed to stop, screamed that I didn't even know him well enough to feel this way. And yet, every fiber of my body, every beat of my heart, every tremble in my hands and stomach screamed the opposite. The car hummed along the wet streets, the rain tapping steadily against the roof, each drop echoing like a heartbeat that matched my own. And in that suspended, delicate space, I realized something terrifying. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I couldn't stop imagining the small, perfect, dangerous intimacy that had formed between us. I couldn't stop craving it. The world outside became a blur of lights and shadows, irrelevant compared to the tension, the pull, the quiet, unspoken desire that filled the car. Every blink of my eyes, every twitch of my fingers, every shallow breath seemed amplified, magnified, making the silence between us electric. And in that silence, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. He had already become indispensable. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to touch him. I wanted to say everything I had been holding back, to reveal the ache, the hunger, the desperate longing that had been building quietly, relentlessly, since the very first time he paid for my coffee. But I didn't. Not yet. Not until I could understand why the connection felt so dangerous, so vital, so completely impossible to ignore. Weeks passed, and with every day that ticked by, the tension between us grew like a storm gathering its fury, dark and inevitable. It was subtle at first, the slight tilt of his head when he caught me laughing at something foolish, the almost imperceptible pause in his step when our hands brushed as he handed me a cup of coffee. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. Every glance, every shared smile, every accidental touch felt like a spark threatening to ignite a wildfire inside me. I caught him looking at me more than once, and each time, I felt my chest tighten in a way that was almost painful. And yet, I caught myself pretending not to notice, glancing away, lowering my eyes to my cup or the floor, trying desperately to maintain control. But my body betrayed me every single time. My heart slammed against my ribs, my palms became clammy, and my stomach twisted into knots that had no reason to exist. Each fleeting look carried a weight, a significance that made my breath hitch and my thoughts spiral. I started noticing the little details about him that no one else would, how the corner of his mouth quirked when he was amused, the slight crease between his brows when he was focused, the subtle way his fingers flexed against the wheel when he drove. Every subtle movement was amplified in my mind, becoming a secret language that only I seemed to understand. And the more I understood it, the more dangerously addicted I became to him, to the tension that existed just beneath the surface. But then came the twist. It was one of those evenings where the café was quiet, nearly empty. The usual chatter of early evening patrons was replaced by the soft hiss of the espresso machine and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I was nursing my cup, letting the warmth seep into my fingers, trying to calm the storm that had taken residence in my chest. The barista, usually cheerful and chatty, leaned closer to me, her expression suddenly serious, almost hesitant. He's not supposed to be here, she whispered, her voice barely above the hum of the appliances. Her eyes flicked toward the door, and then back at me, wary, almost pleading. There are things about him, things that could hurt you. My chest froze, every muscle taut as though someone had dropped an anchor in the pit of my stomach. My hands trembled slightly around my cup. What things? I asked, my voice barely audible, though my mind was screaming in 1,000 directions at once. She shook her head, biting her lip. I can't say. Just be careful. And just like that, she was gone, leaving me with a cup of coffee that suddenly felt too heavy to lift. My thoughts spun, a chaotic storm inside my skull. Things that could hurt me? What did that mean? Was it about who he was? Something he had done? Something he hadn't told me? That night, he didn't show up. I waited, trembling, my fingers clutching my cup like it could anchor me to reality, like it could somehow keep the world from collapsing around me. I stared out at the rain-slick streets, the reflections of neon signs wavering in the puddles, my heart thudding so hard I was sure he could hear it from miles away. Every sound, the honk of a distant car, the whisper of wind through the trees, the soft patter of rain, felt amplified, each one a reminder that he wasn't there. Time stretched unbearably, each minute a small torture. And then, finally, my phone buzzed. My chest leapt into my throat. I recognized the number immediately, the voice on the other end instantly familiar. But when I answered, the words that came were like glass shards, cutting through me in a way I hadn't anticipated. "I can't," he said, his voice low, strained, trembling ever so slightly. "Not tonight. Not ever. I'm trying to protect you, from me." I froze, the cup in my hands trembling, the warmth spilling over into my lap. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or throw the phone across the room. My mind raced. Why? Why me? I demanded, my voice breaking despite my attempts to keep it steady. There was silence, long and thick, and it made the air between us feel impossible to breathe through. And then, finally, he spoke, slow and deliberate, each word landing like a stone in my chest. "Some things you wouldn't understand. I thought staying away was the only way to keep you safe." My breath caught. Safe from what? I whispered, almost afraid to know the answer. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind of silence that stretched and tightened like a noose, making my chest ache, making my stomach churn. From me, he finally admitted, his voice soft but trembling, fragile in a way that made me want to reach through the phone and shake him, demand that he stop hiding, demand that he tell me everything. But the call ended before I could respond. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone as if it held the answers. But all it held was silence. My fingers tightened around it, knuckles white, and I sank back into my chair, feeling more exposed, more vulnerable, more desperate than I had ever felt in my life. I couldn't sleep that night. Every corner of my apartment felt too quiet, too still, too empty without the low, deliberate sound of his voice. Every shadow seemed to hide him, every creak of the floorboards reminded me of him, every distant horn or siren made me jump, half expecting him to appear at my door, to explain, to apologize, to take me away from the uncertainty that had become unbearable. I replayed our rides over and over in my head, the warmth of his hand brushing mine, the stolen glances, the moments of silence that were louder than words. The way he looked at me in the rearview mirror, the subtle tilt of his head when he was listening, the way he seemed to occupy the space around him with a magnetic gravity that I couldn't resist. And now, the same hands that had held me steady were the same ones I feared would hurt me, the same eyes that had drawn me in were the ones hiding shadows I couldn't decipher. Days blurred into each other after that. I went through the motions at work, at the café, on the streets, but my mind was elsewhere, trapped in a loop of longing and fear. Every time the door opened, I flinched, hoping it was him, hoping he had decided to break his silence. And every time it wasn't, I felt the weight of absence press down on me, heavier and heavier, suffocating and relentless. I caught myself talking to myself in quiet whispers, analyzing every interaction we had ever shared. Did he mean something when he smiled that one time? Or was it just kindness, the shield she had warned me about? Did his lingering glance mean curiosity, affection, or something darker? And how could one person cause such chaos in another's life with just presence, just proximity, just subtle, deliberate attention? And then, when I least expected it, I saw him from a distance. Across the street, waiting near a dimly lit intersection, his silhouette familiar, unmistakable. My breath hitched. My fingers clenched my bag, my knees weak. I wanted to run, to confront, to demand answers. And yet, something held me back. Fear. Hesitation. The knowledge that stepping forward might unravel everything I had come to feel. I watched him move, careful, deliberate, eyes scanning, searching. For me? Or for danger? The uncertainty made my stomach twist, a mix of anticipation and dread. And as he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows, I realized just how powerless I felt. How addicted I had become to someone whose presence was intoxicating but whose absence could crush me entirely. I spent that night awake again, listening to the rain against the windows, imagining the countless scenarios that could explain his warning. Was he running from something? From someone? Was there danger that I couldn't comprehend? And yet, the thought of not seeing him again, not feeling that tension, that dangerous intimacy, that impossible connection, was unbearable. Every text, every call, every little gesture in the days following became a source of obsession. I checked my phone compulsively, hoping for a message, a hint, a single word that might explain, even slightly, what he meant. And every time my phone remained silent, the longing twisted tighter inside me, an ache that settled into my bones. And yet, in the midst of fear, doubt, and confusion, there was something undeniable, the connection we shared. The moments that had become sacred, the rides, the glances, the subtle touches, the soft confessions, remained etched in me, impossible to erase. They haunted me, and I welcomed it, even though I knew it was dangerous. I didn't understand him. I didn't understand the warning. I didn't understand the silence. And maybe I never would. But one thing was clear, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I couldn't stop wanting to know him, to reach him, to be near him, even if it meant stepping into the storm he had warned me about. Days turned into weeks. I avoided the café, avoided the streets we'd wandered together under streetlights that blurred in the rain, avoided the small ordinary corners of the city that had suddenly become charged with him. Every familiar café table, every flickering neon sign, every corner where the night air smelled faintly of coffee and wet pavement became a minefield of memories I couldn't touch without feeling the ache in my chest. I avoided the memory of his voice, the low, deliberate tone that had made my knees go weak, that gentle insistence that somehow made the world shrink down to just us in the car, just us in the quiet, just us against the backdrop of rain-slick streets. I avoided the thought of his hands, the small, subtle touches that had sparked tremors through me, that brushed against mine as if by accident, as if the universe itself had conspired to make every fleeting contact feel like a confession. I avoided the memory of the way he'd made me feel seen, understood in a way no one else ever had, a feeling that had slowly become addictive, dangerous, impossible to shake. And yet, fate doesn't let go that easily. Not when it has you in its sights, not when it has chosen you for reasons you can't yet understand. One evening, weeks into my self-imposed exile from the places we had shared, I returned to the café, not for him, not intentionally, but for the routine, for the quiet hum of the espresso machine, for the comfort of something normal. The barista slid a cup across the counter. Her eyes flicked at me, cautious, almost conspiratorial. Beneath the cup, I noticed a small note, folded neatly, the edges smudged with damp from the rain that had soaked my coat as I walked. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. I unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear the fragile paper. I can't stay away either. My heart slammed against my ribs. The letters on the page seemed to pulse with life, each word an echo of everything I had been feeling but had been too afraid to admit. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. And then instinct took over. I didn't think. I didn't pause. I ran. The rain soaked through my hair and my coat, turning my clothes into a heavy, clinging second skin, but I barely noticed. My heart pounded, a frantic drum that matched the rhythm of my desperate steps. Each puddle I splashed through seemed to mirror the chaos inside me. Every flash of neon reflected off the wet asphalt felt like it was urging me forward, guiding me toward him. I reached his door with my hands trembling, fingers stiff from the cold and the anticipation, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. My knuckles rapped against the wood in rapid, uneven beats, and when the door opened, it was as if the world itself held its breath. His eyes were wide, raw, unprepared for the flood of emotions I was about to unleash. Time seemed to freeze. Rain fell around us in a steady rhythm, the droplets catching in the light and turning the night into a glittering storm of silver threads. My heart thudded against my chest so hard it hurt, and I realized I could no longer hold back what had been building for weeks, for months, for every moment since I had first felt his presence in the café, in the car, in the quiet that had stretched between us like a fragile bridge. "I don't care if it's wrong," I whispered, my voice breaking despite my efforts to steady it. The words trembled, barely audible over the rain, but they carried the weight of every suppressed thought, every hidden desire, every moment I had tried to push him away only to find him impossible to ignore. "I can't. I won't stay away anymore." For a heartbeat, he didn't move. He just stared at me, eyes wide, searching, vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. And then, slowly, impossibly, the walls he had built around himself began to crack. The tension in his shoulders, the rigidity in his posture, melted in the space between us. He pulled me close, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that the world outside, the rain, the city lights, the café, the night itself, disappeared entirely. There was just us, trembling in the quiet, reckless surrender of hearts that had found each other despite every warning, despite every obstacle, despite every moment of fear and doubt. My hands pressed against his chest, feeling the rise and fall with each breath, feeling the subtle thrum of his heartbeat that seemed to echo my own. I could feel the tension in his muscles, the hesitation in his movements, the war raging in his eyes between control and desire. "I'm terrified," he admitted, voice low, almost lost against the patter of the rain, his breath warm against my ear, sending shivers down my spine. "Me too," I whispered, and I meant it with every fragment of my soul. Fear didn't matter anymore. Not when the heart had chosen, when every beat, every breath, every inch of my being had been drawn toward him like a magnet, unstoppable, inevitable. Our lips hovered near each other, not yet touching, and every inch of hesitation was electric. Every second of silence was thick with possibility, with danger, with the knowledge that once we crossed this line, there was no turning back. I felt the storm inside me collide with the storm in him, a wild, chaotic, consuming force that demanded surrender. I rested my head against his chest, feeling the steady warmth, feeling the solid pulse beneath his skin, feeling like I had finally come home after a lifetime of searching. The rain continued its relentless dance around us, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the chaos outside, the uncertainties, the fears, the shadows, fade to the background. There was only him, only us, only the impossible connection that had grown from small gestures, fleeting glances, whispered confessions, and stolen rides. Every thought I had tried to suppress over the weeks, every rational voice that told me to walk away, every cautionary whisper that urged me to protect my heart, all of it shattered in the quiet, reckless surrender. I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe: love doesn't wait for permission. Sometimes, it doesn't ask. It doesn't knock politely at the door of your life. It barges in, unapologetic, relentless, and unavoidable. And when it does, you surrender, or you lose it forever. I clung to him, feeling the tremble in his embrace that mirrored my own, feeling the tightness in his fingers as they pressed into my back, anchoring me, holding me in a world that had become nothing but this moment. The city outside became a distant hum, a background of blurred lights and rain-slick streets. The cafes, the notes, the rides, they all led to this impossible, fragile, yet undeniable truth. We didn't speak. Words would have felt redundant, inadequate, fragile in the face of everything building between us. But the silence itself was a conversation, a confession, a revelation. My heartbeat matched his, a rhythm that was urgent, raw, undeniable. I could hear the faint catch in his breath, the slight hitch when our bodies aligned, the warmth in his chest that spread through me like wildfire. For a moment, I wondered how long we could exist like this, suspended, fragile, reckless. Every second felt both infinite and fleeting, a paradox that tightened the ache in my chest. And I realized that the anticipation, the danger, the forbidden tension that had haunted me for weeks, had become the very thing I craved. I felt the brush of his lips against my forehead, soft, fleeting, and it sent a shiver down my spine that left me trembling. I whispered his name, almost afraid to break the delicate balance of the moment, almost afraid that speaking would shatter it. And when his lips finally found mine, it wasn't soft, wasn't tentative. It was fire, a consuming, desperate, beautiful surrender that erased the weeks of fear, avoidance, and longing. The rain outside blurred into a curtain of silver, the world around us dissolving into irrelevance. The notes, the coffee, the warnings, the fears, they all melted away in the heat of this impossible, reckless connection. Every breath, every heartbeat, every pulse of emotion had led to this singular moment where nothing else existed except the two of us, trembling, vulnerable, and finally together. I rested my head against him again, letting the warmth seep into my soaked hair, the steady rhythm of his heart grounding me, comforting me, reminding me that some connections are undeniable. That some desires are inevitable. That some love is too fierce, too consuming, too wild to be ignored. And in that quiet, trembling embrace, I finally understood something I had never allowed myself to believe: love doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for the right time or the right circumstances. It doesn't matter who warns you, who cautions you, who tells you to step back. It finds you. It demands you. It insists that you surrender, or it will slip through your fingers forever. And in that surrender, in that reckless, terrifying, exhilarating surrender, I felt alive in a way I had never known. If this story pulled at your heart like it did mine, I want to know what you think. Did you feel the tension? The longing? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. I read every single one. And if you want to follow along for more stories that will keep your heart racing, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means the world, and it keeps these stories coming straight to you.